Hello and welcome to the YAP Youth Professional Panel 2022. We are so excited that you are here and that we are live today. This is happening. YAP is a free program offered by GRCB it's a virtual program that is offered for youth in grades 8 through 12. YAP youth select an issue that is important to them. They conduct research and use their findings to guide activism that they design. You can find more about us at the link that I'm going to throw in the chat in a second. GRCB, our parent organization, empowers girls, women, and gender expansive youth and adults to believe in themselves by building a supportive community that fosters self-expression, confidence, and collaboration through music education and performance. I'm really excited to hear from the YAP youth and from our professionals today. We have an incredible panel for you. Thank you for coming. My name is Charlotte Huffman. I am GRCB's Director of Community-Based Programming, and I could not be more proud or excited to be here. I am going to now turn this over to the YAP youth to tell us what this panel is about and why we are doing it.
I can go first with introductions, I suppose. Hi, my name's Esme. I'm 16 years old. I use she, her pronouns, and I love traveling in the non-COVID times and drawing things.
Hi, I'm Katie. I use she and they pronouns, and I love reading.
Hello, my name is Zoe. I use any pronouns. I love to draw and photography, and yeah.
And if all of you want to take a quick moment to introduce yourselves, that would be brilliant.
I'm happy to begin if that's helpful. Great. My name is Anna Ehrlich. I use she, they pronouns. I'm currently a community director at the residential life at Wellesley College, and I'm also a live-in mental health professional.
Well, I can kind of continue from there. My name is Claire Marie Lim, and I'm professor at Berklee College of Music. I also work with youth in New York, which is where I am most of the time. So I focus a lot on community stuff back in New York, but also up in the Boston community too. So thank you for having me today.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Dom Washington. They, she pronouns. I am the co-executive director of Everett LGBTQ Youth Space and Resource Center. We just opened last year, and we offer all kinds of resources, job opportunities, and all different kinds of opportunities for queer youth and adults. So.
Hello, my name is Athena Zeider. She, her, hers pronouns. I am currently the AmeriCorps Ambassador of Mentoring in the Mentoring Support program at Partners for Youth with Disabilities, which is a wonderful organization that empowers youth with disabilities to live self-determined lives full of pride, dignity, and purpose. And I just recently was hired on as a program specialist, so I'll get to stay after I complete my AmeriCorps hours.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Bird Spencer. I am the chair of the California Public Policy Committee for American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, as well as sitting on the national board. So I do a lot of policy work related to mental health and suicide prevention. I also am wearing two hats today. I recently started a position as a community engagement manager with an organization called Find Help, which is an online social support search network, which allows you to find resources like food and housing and safe spaces from anywhere in the country. So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina, she, her pronouns.
I'm currently the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fellow at Gann Academy, where I support queer youth and youth of color. And also I will be the new Director of Session-Based Programs at my lovely new home, GRCB. So super excited to be here and with the YAP crew and talking to you all.
Hi, I'm Kay. I'm they, them pronouns. I'm the other co-executive director of Everett LGBTQ Youth Space and Resource Center. We call it LESARC. Yeah, I'm from Everett. So from the greater Boston area my whole life, and wanted to create a space and resource that is heavily lacking in the area. And also, I recognize that I'm driving right now. I didn't realize that this panel was like in the middle of Mother's Day when we agreed to it. So I just have to be in the car or have to be driving for a little bit to make that compromise. But hopefully that I will stop driving soon.
Now we're going to me, Katie, and Esme are going to ask all of you questions. We have a bunch right here. Anyone can answer, and we might also have some questions for specific people too. So I'll start it off. So, what does having a safe space mean to you?
I can hop in on this one. So I came from a part, I think I'm one of the ones that's furthest away from here. I'm actually located in California. So I came from a part of California that was considered pretty conservative. So me as a youth, I didn't really get a chance to really start identifying myself or feel comfortable to until I got up to college in Northern California. And someone introduced me to the concept of social armor, which basically is the feeling of being able to be in situations that don't feel comfortable and recognizing when you can show certain parts of yourself. And then which leads into the concept of the safe space, which is where you feel like you don't have to wear that armor to the full extent that you're wearing it in other communities. You can be more yourself with the people around you and feel comfortable in your own skin. So I learned it was an extremely important balance between the two of those, of having that ability to navigate situations that aren't always going to be perfect, because unfortunately we don't live in a world where it is perfect all the time. And so having that identification of when to wear your armor and when you can just take it off and feel safe and feel like you can be every aspect of yourself. And both of those are perfectly okay. It's just making sure that you feel safe in your own core.
I can jump in on this too. I'm actually also originally from California. I grew up in Imperial Beach, which is as close to Mexico as you can possibly get. Tijuana is just across the border. And it was a pretty rough area that I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of, drugs, a lot of crime. So I never really felt safe as a child. But to me, a safe space, especially for the LGBTQ youth, is somewhere where they can have their dignity respected and have their identities affirmed, and really just have everything about them celebrated instead of ostracized or marginalized.
Oh. I think everyone said beautiful answers, so I won't say too much, but I just want to emphasize just having folks being able to exist without the pressures of heteronormativity. We don't realize how much it seeps into everything, how it informs so many of our interactions and our experiences. And just part of the work that we do is trying to create a space that challenges all those norms and creates spaces from radical imaginations. So creating spaces that live outside of normal society norms. So.
And I'll add just something really basic is just the concept of like simply existing, like existing somewhere where you feel safe mentally, physically, emotionally, somewhere that like you don't have to have this heightened level of consciousness about yourself and your identity at all times, kind of just like somewhere that you can take a breath. Yeah.
Does anyone else? Oh, Katie, you go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, if anyone else wants to say something, they can. But I think we can move on to our next question. Those were all great answers. So when was the time that someone helped make a safe space for you, and how did that impact your life at the time?
I would be happy to share a little bit here. I think when I think about a really prominent safe space for me, it's actually a place that was kind of unexpected for me. I used to work in the Orthodox Jewish community, which is like, I don't want to speak as if a community is monolithic, but there are some more conservative values that do thread their way into this community. And as I was navigating this, and like figuring out my own identities as a part of this, I started to find community with people who were sort of like asking similar questions that I was asking, and maybe like questioning the status quo, pushing a little bit against things that we were teaching or being taught. And it wasn't that anyone necessarily, one person made the space, or it wasn't a mentor figure, but it was just like people who created a space to be vulnerable with one another and like talk about the challenges of performing an identity that isn't authentic or doesn't feel authentic to what we were doing. Just that ability to be, whether it's sort of like fragile like a flower or fragile like a bomb in that moment, like there's that ability to be really fragile and let that community hold me. It was a time that was really beautiful and unexpected, right? It wasn't something that I always thought I would find, but I did find it there, and that was really amazing.
Yeah, I can go. So I identify, queer myself, and I didn't really come to this conclusion until, I was out of high school. But I think that one of the best things that happened for me is just that I had really awesome and dedicated educators who taught me how to find liberation through my education, and I've been very privileged to be able to do that. And I think part of all of our answers are like of being a part of a safe space is all about being able to just be a regular person, right, and not having to think and overthink and all these things. And I think one of the best things for me as a developing queer person, I had teachers who didn't expect me to kind of fit into these like weird binary notions of gender or way of being or the questions I was asking or the things I was interested in. And so I really had, dedicated adults in my life, especially at school, which I'm incredibly thankful for, who took a moment to say, okay, this is a kid who's obviously questioning many things in her life. How can I support her in my classroom, in our club after school, and even beyond high school? Because these are teachers that, I still talk to this day and who support my work and research. And they have always just upheld me, which was really an awesome thing.
Yeah, I can chime in on this as well. Similar to what others have mentioned, I think for for me, in my experience of safe spaces, it hasn't necessarily been about a single person, but really a community. And for me, that community was from peers, which I think is sometimes we kind of overlook a little bit, a little too. But it's like we forget to look at those around us as well. So when I think a lot about safe spaces, I'm reminded really of my friends or those who stepped up to be friends when I thought that I didn't have any. And that's something that I also see now, even when I work with a lot of youth as well. It's a little bit like not necessarily just looking up to educators, which I'm happy to do, work with youth as well, but also like look out for each other, because you're going to be the ones who uplift each other and everyone rises together. I forget the exact saying, maybe someone can remember. Is it the wave that rises, like all boats will rise or something like that? But it's more eloquently phrased in real life. But yeah, just thinking a little bit about how can we support each other so that everyone is, collectively being together instead of feeling as if we're alone. So.
I'll chime in as well. The first time I really can have like a memory of a safe space was actually when I went to college. I went to a historically Black college, and it was the first time that I had more than one of my identities validated. So I went to the like GSAs at high school, and I still felt that there were parts of my identity that weren't being recognized or validated, or that my queer experience wasn't being fully explored, because my queer experience has to do with my race as well. So yeah, being able to be in a space that is intersectional and exploring all different parts of your identity, and also coming from a POC background, being a person of color, being Black, feeling like these conversations can be hard in those communities. So finding out, coming in community with other Black folks who are like, no, like if you look at our history, queerness is very much a part of our history. And it just was, very validating for me and pretty beautiful. Yeah.
I can chime in here as well. I had one of the first moments I had of it was when I was in college. I had joined this internship, and we had this training where the individual, they introduced themselves with mixed pronouns, with she, they pronouns. It was the first time I had ever heard that being an option. It was everything that I had learned before that was very binary, or one, other, or you are, you can use they, them, but there was no in between. And so having that availability to be able to explore it and really see that it was a spectrum and allow the ability to grow and change over time just made it so that it felt like I could actually consider it and be myself a little bit and start growing through the whole process.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Unless like anyone else wants to chime in and add to that question, we can move on to the next one, which I think some of you have definitely already touched on in your answers. But we were wondering, like for you, why is having safe spaces for LGBTQ plus youth important? Just like in general.
I know I just talked about it. I can hop in again. One of the reasons is it's such a time, it kind of ties in with what I was just saying of like, especially while we're growing, and it is such a flexible, fluid space that it needs to be a space where someone has the ability to actually have that bounce around, have that ability to, like, you're not locked in somewhere. You can shift over time. You don't have to go from one to the other in a singular instance. So having that safe space, having that ability where you can just have someone to talk to, have a resource that you can just express it as you're going through the process, talk it out, and really just safely explore, gives that opportunity for an individual to feel safe, to become who they deep down feel they are, even if they don't know where they are yet.
I'll jump in. And I think like this could be obvious, but just like the need for like a safe space kind of implies that like a lot of the world isn't safe. And so I feel like I mean, you could look up statistics, and there's plenty of studies and stuff that show that having a safe space and some type of an intervention, something to break up like the everyday experiences of marginalized folks, you know, somewhere to like get away from that can like drastically like reduce you know, chances of like suicide attempts and just mental health issues in general. So I think, yeah, just having somewhere where you can live, like be in tune with like your own reality, because a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people like these, not for everyone, but a lot of people for like these safe spaces are the only places or environments or contexts where people can exist as their true self. So I just feel like, yeah, that in and of itself.
And I'll jump in as well. I think that an important aspect of creating safe spaces is having a space where people, youth specifically, can see their own identities and especially the intersections of their identities reflected in the people around them so that they are not feeling alone. Because it's really when we're, especially in the queer community, when we often grow up in families where we don't have any queer people, any people like us in our family, that we don't feel safe because we feel alone. We feel like there's no one else like us and we feel isolated. And so creating a safe space is really giving a space for that community aspect to flourish so that they don't feel alone, so that they feel like there are other people who understand some of the things that they're going through.
If I may build on the fantastic contributions here, I think that there are really, really critical social and developmental parts of having a safe space, right? Being able to be in community with folks who share your identity, seeing those identities reflected in leaders in your community. That's powerful, and that's what a safe space is. And I think in addition to that, something I think about a lot in my work now is how when individuals, regardless of the identities they hold, when those identities are marginalized, right, means literally being pushed to the margins of a community, that like feeling of isolation that Athena was just mentioning. And that can really prevent like people, but especially young people and students from accessing critical resources that may be available to them. So I think of this big logistical piece also, that safe spaces can be a really powerful bridge to sort of like help connect students and help connect LGBTQ youth to resources that they may be missing out on, perhaps feeling not empowered to reach out to resources that are powerful and helpful, not understanding systems. I work with a lot of students at my current institution who are queer and also first generation or low income students. And I think that there are really big gaps that I observe and I'm supporting these students with and figuring out how to just like navigate the system, right? And like figure out how to get there. And I think this is an experience that a lot of folks who hold marginalized and multiple marginalized identities experience. So any way to support people and bringing them back into a community in a safe way, right, that allows folks to access more mainstream resources is also really powerful.
Yeah, we can move on to our next question now if no one else has anything they want to add. What can teachers do to be accommodating of and create safer spaces for LGBTQ plus students in their schools, and how and maybe where can they educate themselves on this topic?
I'll go ahead and start this one off. Well, educating yourselves is very important because when I came out, it was at a small liberal arts college in Florida. I was a non-traditional student at 28 years old when I came out as a trans woman. And there were no other out trans feminine people on my campus because we only had a student population of 3,500. And I was still trying to figure out and learn about the community myself. And I was kind of put on the spot and tokenized and expected to educate everyone else as I was learning myself. So that's what we don't want to do. But there are wonderful resources. There's the National Center for Transgender Equality. There's the lots of different LGBTQ resources, GLAD, GLISTEN. My organization, Partners for Youth with Disabilities, actually has a wonderful component called PYD Learn. And you can find that at learn.pyd.org. And there's many different modules you can take. And one of them is on disability and sexuality. And it's really wonderful. And it was put together by my colleague, Piper Slowinski, who is also a trans woman. And this is the first time I've had a coworker who was also a trans woman. So that went a big part of me feeling safe at this organization and wanting to stay and continue my career there. So that's important as well. You want to specifically seek out resources that are written by LGBTQ people for LGBTQ people.
Yeah, and if I could add to Athena's point, I think that oftentimes, like you said, with your experience, like tokenization is a big thing. And I often always highlight with the teachers that I talk to, like, it's not the job of your students to educate you, right? Like about their complex, like life, right? It's their life, they're living it in action, and they don't have all the answers, right? They're searching for answers and they're needing support. And so, yeah, like in addition to the resources that Athena said, I think that, you know, the Trevor Project has some really great public education training programs. Also, the It Gets Better Project also has some really, really great online resources that you can work through on your own. And I also think I think all of us have mentioned community in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's also really important for educators when it comes to professional development. You know, I think that we have to be in community with one another to talk, because I think it just makes, I think for adults especially, like a lot of us are really prideful, right? And we don't want to say, okay, I don't know this term, or I don't know how to support this student with this identity, right? Being in community with other educators who are able to say, you know, I also don't know how to do that. And let's find some resources and trainings to do together, to work through together. And I think that, you know, having some kind of learning community to kind of keep you accountable for your learning, also keep you on your toes, discuss, challenge, I think really can help make your work even better with youth, and kind of making sure that you're always holding yourself accountable, right? To making sure you're seeking out professional development opportunities, and also kind of problem solving and working through these things, not necessarily with youth, but with other adults, which I think kind of takes the burden right off of youth to be those, you know, people to hold you accountable, find other adults to hold you accountable for this work. So you don't have to, right?
I can jump in. So yeah, I think just really like this is dependent on like where you live. Be aware of like the resources in your area, like educate yourself. Honestly, like we could sit here and name a bunch of things too, but like also like people aren't necessarily gonna like remember like things just by like hearing word of mouth. Like, so just to really utilize things like Google and stuff, because like all this information is like accessible. You know, all these different organizations, a lot of us have like resource lists within our organizations that have, and there's so many specific needs too. So it's just like, these are just general things that are helpful. But I think when you come across a specific need, to really just like do your due diligence and like looking things up or reaching out to like local organizations to help you. Like that's what we are here for. And I think also being proactive about the needs rather than just waiting to like, oh, like I don't necessarily need to educate myself on all these things yet because I haven't like dealt with a trans student yet. But it's also like, oh, trans youth exists everywhere. So maybe they're just not going to come to you if they know like that's your that's your approach. So yeah, and I think just like we are as an organization are working with schools and trying to just standardize a lot of practices, just these things that might seem little, but like people don't do them like across the board. So just pronouns in emails and on syllabi, and asking pronouns from everyone in the beginning of the school year, and having like forms and stuff that people can fill out when their pronouns or their name change, and having like this stuff in the computer system, so that we just hear so many complaints about trans youth like being misgendered, that like, oh, one teacher will know like their or use their name and pronouns, but then like in the system, if a substitute's there, they don't know. So just really having like these standardized practices across the board, to like just make it normal that people like share pronouns and we don't like assume. And yeah, I think that's it.
If I may quickly add also, I think Kay mentioned this earlier, right? That when we're talking about safe spaces, that saying safe space implies that there's like unsafety, right? Like a real, like that other spaces are unsafe. And I think part of making schools safer is educators using that power of being adults in spaces to advocate for folks who are like being mistreated, right? Or like not you know, having access to like yes, it's about this education and having more standardized practices, but I think a lot of it, we know that LGBTQ youth are more likely to be bullied than their peers in school, and that contributes to things not being safe, right? Like that's a huge part, I think, of student experience, especially like regionally. I used to live in South Florida, and it was like my school I knew was not a safe place for LGBTQ youth. And I think about how so much work can be done, hopefully in a restorative way, right, in an educational way, but validating students' identities by showing them that you care and you support their identities, and that no one deserves to be mistreated because they hold an identity that may not align with societal expectations or norms or things that they may have been taught otherwise.
Yeah, those are all great. A very similar question is, what can parents do to create safer communities for their youth and for their friends?
I'll chime in on this one. Sometimes it's just the little things, doing things that are making sure that individuals feel like they are supported, or that they are welcome to explore all of the things of all the concepts of being LGBT, or contemplating gender, or anything like that. And just doing little things that maybe you're not calling it out, but it's just making sure that they know it's acceptable. An example of it, I have a pin that I'm wearing on my jacket, which I got for Christmas from one of my siblings. And it was just something, it wasn't brought up. It wasn't something that was a big hullabaloo of like, here, look, I'm showing everybody that I'm supporting you. It was just something kind, and that made it so that it felt as though it was safe to be me in that space without having any kind of questions about it. And it was just a little thing. And doing little actions like that, as well as having those direct conversations. I mean, those are also important, of having direct conversations that you are safe to have those discussions, but reaffirming it in little ways to just make it be something that's natural is really just a comforting thing when it comes to family.
I'll chime in here as well. I think that the ways that you can support your kids, your family members, is believe them, affirm them, celebrate them. And when they tell you who they are, listen, because everyone, no matter who they are, has the right to be the sole expert on their own identity, on their own experiences. No one knows anyone better than they know themselves. And just be there. Be there, accept them, and really understand that if you want them to be happy and you want them to be safe and you want them to live fulfilling lives, you're not going to get there by arguing with them over their own identities or pushing back on who they say they are. Be there.
I'll also chime in. I think a huge thing with families and just community in general is being able to hold other people accountable. I think that parents really need to make the sacrifices if they're able to. I know that can be a privilege, but just letting go of family members who create unsafe spaces, who harm their children, their youth. I think that's really important. And having those conversations with youth, making sure that they feel safe, asking them what it is that they need. Do they feel safe around these family members? Do they feel validated by these family members? Are family members misgendering them? And then not asking the youth to do those difficult things, making sure that you're having those conversations with the family and shielding your children from those conversations. Yeah.
Very similarly, and I meant to say this about teachers as well, just kind of along the same lines of accountability and intervening in like these moments where we hear and we see things that are just sometimes just outright homophobic, transphobic language and slurs. Sometimes it's jokes, but also just things like we all need to unlearn things about like the gender binary and stuff. So like there's so much of this that's like reinforced in day-to-day conversations and language and all these things. So I think just like really trying to like making that commitment to unlearning or relearning and yeah, intervening in moments where the people around us who are not necessarily making any efforts to be accountable or to unlearn, making those decisions, like Dom said, of are these people safe for my children to be around? Yeah.
Yeah, kind of jumping a little bit on what Kate just mentioned. I think in my experience working with a lot of youth, they've reflected that for a lot of parents who aren't necessarily on the same page as them, it's because the parents have trouble letting go of things, which I think is very normal for older folks, right? It's like we spent so many more years learning things in a certain way or having a certain attitude to these things. And this even ties to something that was discussed earlier on, but it's this idea of pride, right? It's like I think Mia mentioned it, but we're so prideful sometimes that it's just hard for us to also admit that we are wrong, or parents to admit that yes, the child that they've been raising, if you will, for so many years is different from what they might have perceived it to be. And I think it's really just about letting go and letting the egos go and really thinking about how can we best support this person, because when you do and you make that you're able to provide support, they will flourish, and that kind of also brings joy back to all of us too. So I think it's also about thinking of that bigger picture for a lot of parents as well.
Yeah, and if I may add just one thing, I think to connect it all, like just embrace a queer way of thinking, right? Like take notes from queer youth who are just like totally ignoring boundaries, all these things that we think we know as fact. Embrace a queer way of thinking. I think connecting to Claire's point, like, I've grown up in, a family of immigrants, right? And, there are, really set in stone notions of what a woman should be, what a man should be, what you should act like, who you should be, right? And I think that I'm like, I don't need to explain anymore, but again, like thinking about embracing a queer way of thinking, challenge what we think is fact, and like letting go of things that are actively harming our children, right? And our youth, and thinking about how we can rewrite our culture, our ideas, these facts to be more productive and be way more positive to support our youth, right? So.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Unless there's anyone else who wants to jump in or add onto that question, our next one was, what advice would you give to LGBTQ plus youth who may not have a safe space?
I can start this one off. First, know that you're not alone. I know it seems that like you're alone and that no one understands. There is community out there. If you cannot find it in person, find it online. There's support groups across all identities. Find your people, find your tribe, find your place where you feel safe and you can share experiences with people. And it could be a really difficult road. You could feel like you're alone. And it could be hard to relate, with people when you can't be out in your community. But it's going to get better. It may take a while. It may go up and down. There may be setbacks along the way, but hang in there and know that, you're not alone. There's a beautiful community of people like you out there in this world, and you will connect with them.
Yeah. Oh, can I? Okay. I was gonna say, yeah, the internet, social media, there's so many more resources nowadays than there was when I was growing up, which is amazing. But something that we run into a lot at our center is youth whose parents are very strict, monitoring their social media, internet use, monitoring where they go. So I guess one solution is just creating safety plans with an adult, a trusted teacher, or a local organization like ourselves. And that safety plan may include like housing, how to move out, things like that, other resources to mitigate the situation. So yeah, reaching out to trusted adults, creating a safety plan that allows you to access safe spaces, access the resources you need without risking your situation at home. So.
And I'd love to piggyback on that and do a quick little plug of the one of the organization I work with, findhelp.org. If you're ever in a situation where you're in immediate need of, you're not sure where to go for immediate housing or to find an LGBTQ center or anything in between that, you can go on there and it's a free site. You can find something immediately that's open around you at that time based off your own zip code, geographic location, all of those things. And there are resources that exist around that are free, that are youth tailored, that are available to you. So make sure that like, if you need an immediate resource, ask for help. I want to reiterate what Athena said. You are not alone and it will get better. Ask for help. There are a lot of people who want to help you.
I can think of another thought as well. Just thinking of, I think Claire had said this earlier, just like your friends also creating safe spaces. So yeah, if there isn't a safe space for you, creating one with your community. Yeah, so much of my experience feeling safe in college too was just having a bunch of queer friends around me, and we created our own organization. We created, didn't survive long, but while I was there, we created something and it just shielded me from so much violence. So yeah, being able to just rely on the friends that you already have, the queer community that you already have.
Thank you so much. What advice would you give allies, youth or adult, who want to be making safer spaces for their community?
I can jump in. I think that one thing that all allies should remember is that, you don't create spaces based on what you think is helpful. You need to know. And how do you know? Through asking, through being in dialogue, through talking to people. I think that, I feel like the classic scenario is right, like, a straight, well-meaning student creating like a gay straight alliance, and it may not be going well because there's certain ideas about what this space will be based on like, one person's dream, right? And I think that nothing is made, I think I'll die saying this, my last words, but like community is everything, right? And I think that you don't create sustainable, healthy and holistic communities alone. You have to do it with others. And I think especially for allies, like you have to be in dialogue with like queer folks. You have to be. There's no question about it. And if you're not, you're doing something wrong. So.
To build on what Nina's saying, and I think this goes for a lot of activism generally, that this is a lot about inventorying your skills and your identities, understanding what privileges you hold and leveraging those privileges to support people, right? So like understanding that voices like people listen differently, right? And this is like a sad reality of our world, but like people listen differently depending on who's speaking and who's in the room. So like if you're someone that you know that you can advocate for someone and you're going to catch the ear of stakeholders or people that can advocate or support people, like do that work, right? Like really engage, let people who need to rest right? And if you have the energy and the power and the privilege to do that advocacy, like right, the education, the outreach, the intervention, do that work, because know that the folks who are often doing the work are often the folks who are lowest on their reserves of energy or spoons. So allow those folks to have some reprieve.
And just to go along with that, no matter, as an ally, no matter to which community, whether it's the queer community, Black Lives Matter, or the disability advocacy community, don't center yourself in someone else's community. You being an ally, creating safe spaces, is creating spaces for other people, for that community to take leadership in the space. It's not your place to, boost up your own resume. It is the space that you need to create for others, that you need to know when silence is a tool of advocacy.
Yes, Athena is exactly what I was going to get at. Is just really decentering yourselves in these contexts and in these conversations, and it's just like, and I think this is when safe space too becomes kind of like has multiple meanings. So like a lot of times we're talking about like this physical space, and as someone who like helped create like a resource center for LGBTQ youth, like that's, my mind goes there. And it makes sense that like we as queer people created that, but that's not something that like allies, not necessarily looking for you to like run some physical space, right? Creating a safe space can be meaning like you, like the environment of you're around, like making it safer. And I would say like a lot of the work that allies should do is with non-queer people. Like that's the bulk of the work that needs to be done, that you need to take on, and that's just very taxing and violent for queer people to engage in. That's the type of work, along with like what other folks said about, obviously educate yourself first from queer, like get what your knowledge is and your understanding is from queer folks, but like also you don't necessarily need to be at like every queer event and whatever. Like a lot of the work that needs to be done is the other people you around, to creating safe space by like proxy, like making the people that we have to interact with every day like safer people, more educated people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on what everyone's been saying too. It is very much about the create space, don't take the voice. Make sure that the voice of the those queer youth are the ones that are being heard, but you're creating a space where it's safe for their voice to be heard. So that could be like tying in basically what everyone's been saying, because everyone's saying such wonderful things here, is making sure that like as an ally, you have that ability that if you're in a space with that extended family who may not be educated, it's going back to that, like, don't make the queer youth, don't make the queer individual be the one to have to do that education. Be open with those conversations with the folks. If you are educated on the subjects of LGBTQ, of gender, of everything, being willing to have those conversations and correct them when someone, even if they're not in the room, making sure if they have specific pronouns, correcting them even when they're not there. Making sure that it is safe, that when that person comes into that room, they can be able to be themselves.
Yeah, those are also awesome. So this one's like a slightly longer question. So for those of you who have worked with LGBTQ youth, how would you, so talk more about your experiences and why did you want to start working with LGBTQ plus youth? What did you learn? What information would you like to pass on from that experience?
I can kick this one off. Before the pandemic, in early 2019, I had the absolute privilege of coordinating the 2019 New Jersey Trans Youth Forum, where I worked with a youth advisory board, similar to the Youth Activism panel or project, of trans and non-binary youth planning a conference for their peers. And it was all of their ideas, all of their vision for this conference. I was simply the administrative support that put their ideas into action. And it was a truly wonderful experience. And I guess I want to work with LGBTQ youth because I want to be the person who I needed when I was younger, but didn't have. I want to create space for students to figure themselves out and play around with identity and embrace different sexualities, different gender identities, because our community is fun and it's a great space you learn not only about yourself, you learn about humanity through being queer and being part of the queer community. And so it's wonderful to see young people have the absolute privilege to do that.
I can jump in. So during my fellowship year, I've been working with students, and I think that a huge growing point for me that I will openly admit is I think that sometimes I thought that my queer identity made me kind of have to be this person who knew everything, right? And I think that I learn from them every single day, whether it's like a TikTok they're showing me or Instagram infographic, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this resource? Or what is this thing? Or what is this new word or phrase or type of thing, So I think that the biggest thing I've learned is that,
you have to keep learning, even if you're queer, right? And I think that oftentimes I think that's with any marginalized identity, right? You think because you hold that identity, there's nothing that you must learn, right? Because you live it, which I think can be true, but also, is not true, right? I think there's a balance, right? You have to know when, your personal experiences do sometimes provide the answers, but sometimes they don't, right? And how to navigate that. And I think similar to Athena's point, like I definitely wanted to be someone who I didn't have. And also I think that I grew up in a time like that, in Massachusetts, like it was a good place to be queer. And I had many other queer friends that were open, right? And I think that I often didn't see, like similar to what Dominique said, like the intersection of my, racial identity and my queer identity. And that's what I would love to be for youth, a culturally competent person who understands that, the reality that you may be living at home is not in school may not be the same, or in a safe space may not be the same at home. And I think someone who understands just like the stark difference between those two realities and is able to help navigate through that is really important. And yeah, I just, the biggest thing is that I've learned so much, and always being open to learning and hearing and listening, just like an ally, right? Kind of thinking about how you can be an ally, right? With your adulthood, with your position in society.
I was going to speak, to Nita's point about just learning so much from youth. I learned that youth culture is like drastically changing from like year to year, even like every 5 years. I feel like I need a reboot on how to access youth where they're at, how to meet their needs. What are their needs? What are they interested in? Is the structure of our youth center a place that they want to visit, that they want to hang out at? So I definitely learned that youth are drastically changing and to meet them where they're at. But I started youth work long before I was working with exclusively LGBTQ youth. I started a lot with like sexual health and consent. And I just learned so much from that experience that we need to be working with youth because that's where we can make the largest changes in our society, that we can enact those changes quickly, and that we can really ingrain good values, challenge norms. And the best place to do that, the best place to start is when folks are youth. So.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Alex, are you going to say something?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add one last little point to that as well. Of one of the experiences that I had from when I was a youth or something I noticed with a lot of my friends that like are all I still talk to from high school, is just the sheer number of us that like we all congregated together, and we've realized now as adults, we were all queer, and none of us felt comfortable in that space. And there was several of them that I almost lost, and one that I did lose because they did not feel safe. And so having those like passive resources around as well, of the ones that aren't at the point where they can yet come forward or come out, making sure that there are things around on campus, in the communities, just wherever youth are, that they can see, and they don't have to actually ask or talk to anyone to say that they need that resource. It's just there and available for them. So making sure that even if as the community is already like they're needing it, afraid or whatever the circumstances, making sure that they can see the resources and that they're accepted, and that it's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to ask and get support.
I think we only have a couple minutes left, so maybe time for one quick question from the chat. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Someone was wondering, I was curious to hear thoughts on format of safe spaces, physical spaces / rooms, resource centers, virtual spaces, or just relationships with certain people. Kay did talk about that a lot just now. Does anyone have like any other thoughts on like safe space formats?
I think that to piggyback what we were just saying, empower the youth to create their own safe spaces, really. There can be a fine, you have to do the education and the work, the self-work beforehand, but really let them teach you what they need in their spaces.
Uh, yeah, I was just gonna say that our time is up now, so.
Yeah, our time is coming to a close. This has been an incredible panel. How amazing it is to hear you all. I hope that you all get a chance to go look at the YouTube Live. There's a lot of amazing comments on there from folks who are super, super grateful to hear you and your experience, strength, and hope. So thank you for that. I'm going to let the YAP youth take us out. I believe that they are closing us out. But I just wanted to say thank you and for coming to the live, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. You all are amazing experts, and we're so lucky to have heard from you today.
Yeah, so like Charlotte said, thank you all so much for coming. We really enjoyed having you here and asking you questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come and be part of this conversation with us. I guess it was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay, we did it.